now called. Good afternoon. The meeting is now called to order. The time is 4 p.m. And can we get a roll call, please?
Montserrat Caballero, Jason Freed,
Good afternoon.
Stacy Gist,
Present.
Taylor Pacheco,
Here.
Dr. Siqueiros,
Present.
Dr. Toro,
Present.
and Zenia Vidal.
Present.
Thank you. Do we have any 2.3 any agenda adjustments? Okay, since there are no agenda adjustments, we're going to follow. Now it is called to the audience. We do have one. So let me start by reading the information about the procedures. All public comments for the meeting will be accepted in written form only. All public comments are due to the Budget Advisory Committee no later than 12 p.m. on the day of the committee meeting. Members of the public who wish to address the Budget Advisory Committee shall submit their written comments via email at bac@tusd1.org. In the subject line of the email, they need to indicate call to the audience, includes the topic. Public comments will be read into the record by the committee chair. The remaining rules for call to the audience will remain in effect. At this time, the committee chair will read the written comments. Each comment is allowed 3 minutes. At the conclusion of the call to the audience, the committee chair will ask if individual committee members wish to respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the committee or wish to ask staff to review a matter. No more than 2 committee members may address each criticism. All right, here is the letter of call to the audience. It's about administrative staffing formula consideration. Good morning, Budget Advisory Committee members. My name is Tamara Ray, and I'm the principal of Santa Rita High School. As you know, Santa Rita is a small, comprehensive high school within our district that serves approximately 400 students from around Pima County. I am writing to advocate for Santa Rita, but really all comprehensive high schools, to establish a baseline administrative staffing need, regardless of the student enrollment count. What makes a high school comprehensive is the wide variety of academic offerings, as well as the diverse student-centered extracurricular, co-curricular opportunities of the school. Currently, the staffing model is 1 to 600 for assistant principals. Santa Rita, despite not meeting that 1 to 600 ratio, still has the same scope of site responsibility, just on a smaller scale. For your reference, our general areas of administrative responsibility are divided for optimal operation and can be found below. Principal, curriculum and instruction, budget, finance, data intervention specialist, site council, accountability, IAP. Title I, advanced learning experience, AVID, AP dual enrollment, extracurricular, co-curricular, supervision, hiring, staffing, departments, including PLCs and evaluations, grounds, counseling, CRC, health office, ELA, math, CTE, exceptional education, and world languages. Assistant principal, student discipline, attendance, MTSS, in-school intervention, facilities, rentals, PBIS, family engagement, compliance, security, emergency drills and plans, Proposition 301 submission, summer programming, extracurricular, co-curricular, supervision, hiring, staffing. Departments include PLC and evaluations, athletics, activities, custodial, security, campus monitors, fine arts, PE, health, social studies, science, language acquisition. My hope is that the Budget Advisory Committee recognizes the need for all comprehensive high schools to have a minimum baseline of one principal and 1 assistant principal in order to successfully support the wide range of responsibilities regardless of student enrollment/count. Thank you for your time and consideration. Tamara Ray, Principal, Santa Rita High School. Okay, anyone want to comment? All right, since there are no comments.
So is it comments specifically to the principal or to discuss that that whole concept of ratios and everything in general? Or should that wait for later on after the call to the audience?
That should wait for after, because that's what we're going to do. Thank you, Dr. Toro. Okay, now we're going to go to 4.1, which is minutes of the Budget Advisory Committee from last week at January 16th.
Can you repeat that, please, Stacy?
It's a review of minutes, so we're going to discuss the minutes, or a motion to pass the minutes from last week's meeting. Do we have a motion to pass last week's minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Taylor, for the second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're moving the minutes forward. Now we are getting into our continual study action, which is 5.1, which is discussion and potential vote on final recommendations for the governing board priorities. So real quick, I did want to, and Tanya sent them out real quick, which kind of listed our priorities that we had already kind of drafted up as the district sent, gave us the priority, or not the district, well, the governing board had gave us a list of priorities to look over. And so we pretty much have done all the things that they asked. So student fee schedules, future of summer school, PE and fine arts teaching positions, and then our final task, which started last week, was the school-based administrative positions. And we kind of left it at that with some more asks from Ricky, which I know he had sent to us in an email about some of those administrative assistant principal positions. Anyone want to start us back up or look back up? Dr. Toro! I know you've been waiting.
Girlfriend, it's always nice, like, you know, like I tell my academy kids, do your homework, be prepared, use your data. So I'm ready to rock and roll for the sake of kids. So is there a way, first of all, that we can add priority number 5 or no? Was that already predetermined? The priorities, the 4?
Yes, they
Yeah?
were predetermined by the board and approved when it went over public
Got
committee.
it.
So I don't think we can
Okay.
do that, but that's where when we look at a motion, we could
okay.
recommend.
Oh, got it. Okay, perfecto. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Ricardo, for your turnaround response with the request for the data of the assistant principal positions. It was very eye-opening, people. I hope it was just as eye-opening for you as it was for me. But what I noticed is Ricardo created, offered 2 tables. The table of schools that have an AP or more, and then the table of schools that don't, and their current student enrollment as of Friday, the 17th. So what I noticed is to kind of break it up by numbers of students, there are 6 schools that have less than 400 students in them. 6 schools. So that's Santa Rita, that's Booth-Fickett, Safford, Sechrist, Utterback, and TAP/Project More. And then I looked at the list of the schools that don't have an AP, who have more than 400 students. So the list that I just gave you of the 6 are of the schools that have an assistant principal with less than 400 students at their school. And there's now on the other side, on the flip side, there's 7 schools that have more than 400 students without an AP. So that is Bonias at 417, Miller at 491, Wheeler at 403, Wright at 422, Lenurquides at 433, Robbins at 435, and Dodge at 418. So, to me, that's not equitable. To me, that's not fair. And I know that we have 6 that have less than 400 students. And then we have, and is it right what you put here, Ricardo? I just want to make sure because I'm like OCD like that. But I see that it says tab/project more as of Friday the 17th, there's only 23 students enrolled.
Yeah, because it's an alternative ed program. So that is more TAP than Project More. So what's different about them is there's a principal at Project More, right? You've got Izzy down at Project More, but because he can't be at, both schools, the assistant principal that's assigned there is essentially the administrator for TAP.
So how many students are at Project More?
Give me 1 second. I can get that for you real quick.
Just to clarify while you're getting that, so TAP and Project More are not at the same site.
They're at the same site. They're in the same building. They used to be out of the Star Center, TAP. But I believe they're both now on the Project More campus, if I'm not mistaken. Let me don't quote. Project More has 55 students. And
Okay.
23.
Okay, go ahead.
And then TAP has 23. So there's a total of 78 students between both schools.
Okay. So again, my recommendation here is why are we not consolidating Project More TAP with Santa Rita? So there is one AP, one principal at the same site covering those 3 groups, because like at Pueblo, for example, we have Pueblo, and then we have our ELD population, we have our CBI program. So it is totally doable because we do that at Pueblo, right? And then those schools that are below 400, those AP positions, I'm not saying should go away, but those positions should be transferred to the schools that are above 400 who have no AP. That is inequitable. And I know, Roberto, you alluded to that. You're saying this is a prime opportunity to rectify this. I know principals, like you said, still come to you and say, hey, why does this school who has this little have an AP or more or whatever? And then why I have way more than they do and I don't have any help? And, and then of course I understand. I mean, I work at a high school, so I understand when the Santa Rita principal said, look at what I do as a principal and look at what my assistant principal does. It's a lot. Of course it's a lot. But so are the schools that are at over 400. They're only working on one principal and no AP. So how can we rectify this and make it fair so we don't burn out our good principals? Give these students, these schools on the right side of the form you gave us, their AP, if they have more than 400, I know the number is 1 to 600, which I don't really agree with personally, but point is, then why do the schools who have less than 400 on the left side of the form have an AP? So that just food for thought on that one. And then we'll go on to the other items later, but that's where I'm at right now with that data.
Okay, since my hand's raised, I'm gonna call me. I do really want to advocate for this because not only am I a principal and do I represent, but there are so many factors in that. Like, and just saying, hey, we can move all these people. I'm not saying we can or we can't. I'm just saying that when we even look at 400 or 1 to 400, first of all, the ratio is 1 to 600. So if we want to, as a budget advisory committee, if we wanted to recommend to the board that they look at adjusting the formula, I think that that would be more of our role, that they do some deeper dives into that. I am also going to say in these and hearing not just hard administrators work, but the same thing happens with administrators because we're boots on the ground with teachers, is that I'm going to tell you, we won't keep good administrators if we say things like, by the way, we're really going to look at your ratio at 1 to 600 or 1 to 400 for those kind of things. And I don't think just keeping one, we are people and we are situations and we are kids. Just having one indicator to say that's the indicator and it's going to help our schools or hurt our schools, I think is inefficient and ineffective. And Dr. Toro, I do agree with you. I do. And if you actually look at outside districts, which we have been looking at kind of the ratio in that, the number is not 1 to 600. It is a little bit lower. I will also say at some other schools and other positions, there's a lot of other things that go on in those schools. So I agree that there's been turnover over time. And numbers over time that needs to be looked at. But I think it's very hard to just say, easy peasy, we can do that, because I know, for example, the situations at TAP, as that is a very specialized program, that might not be an easy thing to just take over and put into one of our high schools or stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just knowing from what I've heard about it, and I've been there and seen some different things going on. So I do want to take that into consideration as we're talking about advisements for some very tough topics. Taylor.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be comfortable with recommending a set ratio like that. I think there's just too many factors that go into how many assistant principals a school would need. There's many examples I could give of that. I also wanted to know if there's been any conversations with Eli about this.
I'm going to jump in from that, and Dr. Ciccados, you're next. As Eli in representing, we are very aware of both money, numbers, and conversations. We do and would like the district to have some conversations to create more of a rubric-based thing that you come into. For example, and Taylor, you're at Catalina, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I remember you moved. Like at Catalina, we know that there is some things going on at that high school. We know drops in enrollments that have happened, but we also know that there's been some improvement going on there. I cannot speak of everything on Catalina because I'm not a Catalina expert. I'm not the principal nor the staff. And so in working with that, really looking at, as schools are growing or schools are reducing, what can we do to make something that is going to stand the test of time and really be reflective? Because what I'm hoping you guys feel, when you have a great leader and that leader leaves, it's very hard on the community. It's very hard on teachers. When you, as a leader, if you don't have the right support system, teachers, all those kind of things, it's really hard that way. And it's also hard to rebuild when you're trying to rebuild a school. So those are kind of some things that from Eli and from our perspective, we want to look at and make it more comprehensive, because there have been schools that have grown, including, I don't know, Robbins K8 is one of a school that is up there in that And I know that there is to make it more equitable for an AP to really look at those roles, but to do it in a smart way so it doesn't gut the community and what's happening there. Dr. Siqueiros.
Thank you. I just want to kind of follow up. Dr. Toro, I agree with your key points there. However, I also agree with Stacy and Taylor, what you all said. There are just a lot of variables in this decision making. A lot of those variables that we just simply don't have the information on. Because I believe that every school can probably give a similar argument or perspective as you did for your situation that you described in those Project More, for example, and some of the smaller schools versus those schools that have larger populations that just by the numbers we would say, okay, let's give them an AP. I get that part. But I think last time or last week when we met, we talked about a recommendation that included the governing board establishing a committee through the superintendent's office to take a deep dive into this so that we create that the governing board creates an equitable and fair and just system that takes into consideration the needs of that specific community, the needs of the specific grade levels and what that implies, whether you're an elementary school principal, a middle school principal, or a high school principal. Each one of them can articulate a justification, but somewhere along the line, the governing board is going to have to establish what that procedure and that process looks like. And again, I don't, as I indicated last week, I just don't feel that I have enough information to make very specific recommendations about which school gets an AP and which school does not. But rather, I would support us making a motion of some sort that gives a recommendation to the governing board to establish a process to get us to that end. And I know there are some dates that were critical that we spoke about, but I'm sure that we cannot get to that end in that short period of time. This is going to take a months long process to come to an end. But again, Dr. Toro, I feel your argument. I really do. But at the same time, recognizing that there are a lot more variables that we need to take into consideration if we were going to make those types of decisions. And I don't believe this. Our job is to make that type of recommendation, but make a recommendation in the process to get to that end.
Thank you. Jason Free.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Siqueiros nailed it for me. It's our job to give recommendations, and with the understanding that there's expertise that exists in this district. I have faith that that we can really make a suggestion, right, and push hard on the governing board. There's an understanding that there's some cost savings that need to be had. There's some cuts that need to be had. I personally am not comfortable with that notion of just saying, well, here's the threshold, which, mind you, there's no language there's not, this 400 is not language that we have. It's not in the district. The 600 is the language. So we would, and in my opinion, 600 was arbitrary in the same way that 400 would be arbitrary. There are some great things that are happening, and there's no school that would say, yeah, we don't need an AP. We got an extra. They're just sitting around doing nothing. Very busy. And their work is of great value. So I do think that really what I heard from Stacy is this idea of something that's more comprehensive, that says let's take into account multiple factors, and that should be really kind of the recommendation. I think that suits us best. And then if our board liaison or the governing board as a body has greater questions, then when this is being presented, then that's really what I'm going to hear from, that's going to be part of the presentation that Stacy is saying, that says, no, we don't just believe that here is the one golden ticket and instead it takes a lot more sophistication. And then the last piece is that Dr. Siqueiros, to your point, as far as, could take months and months, it could, and I'm going to, as just somebody who serves in this capacity, I'm going to say it needs to not take months and months, because then Ricky and his team are not going to be able to get to a budget that we need the district to get to. And so it really has to be something that the governing board prioritizes, gets people, that's the right people in the room, gets them in there quickly, with an understanding that, the goal isn't some number of $2.1 million. The goal is to try to figure out what would be truly equitable, to address, the priority of assistant principals throughout our district.
Dr. Toro.
This is why, meeting of the minds is always better than just one, right? So in listening to all of you too, again, it's just, I'm a numbers person, right? So, and that's the best way to start in an objective way, right? Not with feelings and opinions and people's names, but positions and data, right? Which is why we so need Ricardo and his reports. But what you guys said about, okay, no arbitrary numbers. There should be a leadership at the district level that creates a comprehensive review of what schools should and can go without an AP. I 100% am sold on your guys' feedback, and I respect all of you on this committee. So I totally understand that. But I also agree with Jason. It's not going to take months and months, because if I was a principal of any of these schools without an AP, I would be like, oh, so I have to wait another year before you guys get this right? Heck no. Because I've got school districts, neighboring school districts in TUSD who not only will pay me more, but they're going to, but I'm not going to be at schools that have less than what I have to deal with. And you're wanting me to wait another year to see between now and then when we can get this all right? I'm thinking we gotta keep our people. And if we keep saying, oh, it's going to take us another year, I would be like, you know what? I'm out. Because how long have these schools had this situation? How long have they gone with more students? And again, I know it's contingent upon need and speciality, all those things, okay? But how long have these principals gone without when they've seen their colleagues have less and have an AP? I'm not okay with telling them, oh, it's just going to take us another year to get it right. That is unacceptable to me. That is unacceptable. I would hate to be that principal in that situation. So I approve to recommend that our recommendation to the governing board be that leadership should have a comprehensive review of the schools that have and don't have APs, and to determine then which schools are going to have an AP, and that has to be again, like Jason Free said, it has to be a priority, or our district is going to start losing good leaders, and we don't want that for our students.
Thank you. Dr. Siqueiros.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify my months and months. I didn't mean years and years. I meant, because we were given a timeline that something's occurring in March that we have to kind of get ready for. And so my perspective is very similar to Jason's and Dr. Toro, that this needs to be done quickly and thoroughly. And I think it was also suggested last week that there's already an established group of administrators that can begin this process or added to their work already. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing at this particular point, but that could be inclusive of their work and at the appropriate level of people, whether it's teachers, whether it's counselors, whether it's parents, whether it's other folks in the community that can participate in that process. So I'm with you guys on that as well.
Taylor.
Yeah, just a quick question. The call to the audience that we heard from earlier, Tamara Ray, does anyone know if she's part of this committee as well?
She is not part of that committee. There are some people from Eli. There was a representative from elementary, K-8, middle schools, and high schools. So there is a representative. And just because I serve on all these different committees and I run them kind of how I run the school, is that those committees then give us the information of what's going on, obviously not the nitty gritty, but a little bit of it. And then I publish like who's representing so that it doesn't all come through me, but it goes to whoever so that they can get feedback from audiences or whatnot on particulars. Just so you know, like other meetings, it's I kind of run a little bit of like a budget advisory in Eli, and then people go off and do their own different committees. But so we really try to work on getting feedback from as many stakeholders as possible, because I believe, and Ricky, correct me, there's like 86 schools.
88.
88, sorry. And so obviously when you're talking about 88 schools with different communities and different people and different people they serve and at different grade levels, all the way from pre-K to Mary Meredith extending on, there's each one has different things. So we try to get a true representation of what people need. And even when we're saying that, Dr. Toro, like those are the things I wanted the nitty gritty to really be able for people to advocate, because you don't know what you don't know. And so even in those things, as we're trying to successfully build out schools for kids that they won't, for careers that they don't even know exist yet, especially with the advancement of AI, I just keep thinking about like we want to make them so they still grow and survive, whether it's a COVID or the next big thing that hits us. So those are at least representatives on those. Dr. Siqueiros, your hand is still up. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. I also wanted to emphasize that the role of a school administrator, whether it's an AP or a principal, is to do all those administrative functions, right? But it's also to build relationships with their students, build relationships with parents, with the community, to support the work of their teachers and support staffs. That it's hard to measure those things. How much time you need? Do you need 2 hours? Do you need 1 AP? Do you need 2 APs to get all that work done? It is really hard to just quantify this by a student number. Because if I'm a principal and I've got 20 teachers and 10 of them are brand new to the profession, then I need to spend more time with that group of teachers than I might otherwise not have to if I had a more experienced staff. So I just want us to keep in mind that role of that principal and AP goes beyond just and I recalling the list of in the call to the audience that they had a lot of stuff on there, but I think the focus on the priority of the role of the principal and assistant principal in ensuring that our kids get the best possible education, that our teachers and support staff can do the best possible job in getting to that end. And it does require a very thoughtful and methodical process to get to the end, because this is really a tough situation for the governing board, and bless their hearts, because this is going to be a tough decision they have to make. But the more work we put into this now, the better it is going to be in subsequent years, so that we can retain those teachers, Dr. Toro, that we can retain those principals in TUSD, because right now it is a principals and teachers market out there. They can go wherever they want, and we have to do our due diligence to make sure they remain.
Thank you. And I do want to say this last thing. I really do. I've been on this committee for 3 years, and I really do think that the district has valued, and Jason as the last and Taylor as the last chairs, they've taken our feedback and they've used that with other, whether it was a committee or started some of that to spark. And so we did get the bond advancement that came out of this committee. So I know that they are listening and they are trying in these tough times as we're navigating through this to really develop better plans to help us. And when I say us, I mean all of TUSD in that. So I do think our work has been not only heard, but as we give them advice or we give them we advise them on what we think, they are really listening. With that said, is there a way that Tanya can pull up? We kind of had something ready for priority 4, which is school-based administrative positions that we had sort of muddled through. And I know that there was some more discussion on that. Taylor, I see your hand raised. So if you want to start it off, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm pretty comfortable with the first part of this, recommending some sort of way to determine how many APs a school gets that's comprehensive. It's not just based on student number. I think sounds like we're maybe ready to move on to the second part of that, if we're not recommending to go to this ratio, that there's still this budget shortfall that we need to figure out something to do with. And so our recommendation, just kind of hanging off of the last meeting there, was to have the subcommittee meet with upper administration to analyze where cuts can be made at that level. My concern with that is that what I'm picturing happening with that is a meeting of all of the top people of each department, cutting people below them. And I don't know that that's really where we want to go with this either. So my concern is about how that process would happen. I know that that's not really our responsibility to figure out where cuts would be made. But my concern is that if we're asking upper administration to make those decisions, that the cuts would happen in places that we were not necessarily thinking of, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Dr. Toro.
So, part 1 of 2, which is what, Taylor mentioned. She mentioned 2 points, which she broke up that priority number 4 paragraph into 2, and I 100% agree with her direction. So, like, for example, I would say prioritizing the budget and positions that interact directly with students and create a comprehensive review of which schools need to have at least 1 AP, and a comprehensive review of which schools need to have at least 1 AP. Decided upon, what did we say, the leadership? I don't know, what is that? The associate superintendents? What would be leadership, and the superintendent, is that it? Or whoever they decide to create a committee for that, or what? Upon a leadership group identified by the superintendent? I don't know.
I don't know. Jason, I see your hand up and I see you're nodding. So I don't know if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think for me, I wouldn't phrase it as this, what do we have? Where is it? Formula for APs, a comprehensive school. What we talked about is it's less a formula and less a analysis of APs across the district. And so to me, because what I don't want when this is done is to someone say, well, this one, yes, this one, no. I agree, Dr. Toto. I think everybody's saying the same thing. This can't be, we're not kicking the can down the road, right? But if somebody does that analysis, right, then I say, okay, every school needs an AP. Which schools have a greater need, right? And ideally, the district's able to look for potential cuts in different spaces, because that's the first part is really the more important part, right? That's the first part, which says we don't want to see cuts, right? So that we start from there. Then there's this analysis of that position, creating a set of a concept of how we prioritize which schools are able to maintain and which schools potentially could lose an AP position, right? That to me is where we've got to get to, right?
Mhm. So how would you word craft that? Because the formula word is going away. That's why it's like been pushed to the bottom. So how would you word craft that? A comprehensive review
Of the assistant principal position, right? So because it's not a review of which schools need to have one. They all want one and they all need one, right? But with an understanding that because of the budget constraints, that not every that there and because of the needs, not every school that wants will necessarily be able to retain, or they may lose one of their two assistant principals, because that's another thing that becomes part of this process, right? So comprehensive review of the AP position. And yeah, I mean, because I think because I don't think we want to put that next part, a review of the AP position. Um, fact, taking into account the myriad of factors as to which schools would have the priority of an assistant principal. Maybe something to that effect. Stacy, I don't know how that's hitting you.
I like it. I'm just processing. Taylor.
Yeah, I want to make sure that it's focused not just on whether a school has one or not, but the number that that school has.
Isn't that part of the comprehensive review? Like it's going to include looking at the numbers, looking at need, looking at the kind of students that are at that school. Isn't that all part of the comprehensive review?
Well, maybe we need to state it out. Like, and I don't know, I'm married to an engineer, so the word metrics come up in everything we do at home. So, like maybe we don't, okay, so prioritize budgets and positions that interact directly with students and creating a comprehensive review.
I think the part I'm having an issue with is have at least one AP.
That's where I'm also like, and maybe we don't even need to say that.
Because we also want to review schools that, that say they should have two and they have three or something like that. Not just whether it's one or zero, but the total number that they have.
Does it have to be instead of at least one AP, more something to the effect of determining the assignment of APs based on this criteria?
Or allocation.
Allocation.
I like allocation.
Yeah.
Maybe priority of which schools are allocated AP positions.
I don't know about which schools, because I think that's still focusing on like whether they have it or they don't. I'm trying to think of how to fix it.
You want to just say of schools that are allocated?
Well, yeah, because what I'm thinking of is we know they all need an AP, at least one, right? We know that. But I mean, the governing board has to find monies to fund these positions, additional positions, but that's not our job to determine which schools get the additional allocations or reduction, for that matter. But to create a process that determines an equitable allocation of APs based on whatever criteria is this or whatever however they decide to determine that, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not.
Are you referring to some type of a rubric, Dr. Siqueiros, like a rubric that they would follow for the comprehensive review?
Well,
And then one of them could be numbers, and one of them could be need, one of them could be, you know what I'm saying?
yeah, but that's really hard to come to in the short period of time. But at the same time, I know we talked about not kicking the can down the street, so to speak, for future governing boards or budget committees to make recommendations. But what can we do now in the very short term to recommend that a committee be put together or whatever to determine how those APs are assigned, the number of APs allocations to by school? You still have to have some form of criteria, right?
Yeah,
So you have to
like a form of rubric. A criteria is like another
yeah,
way
right,
of putting it down in a rubric.
right,
But it's
right.
got
So
to be a standard, like a standardized rubric or criteria, because then other schools are going to be like, well, what did you base this decision on?
right,
They
right.
have, you know, that team that made the decision should have something to say, look at, these are all the different categories or criteria that we considered in our comprehensive review. That should be standardized, you know. I think that, you know.
Could you say creating a comprehensive rubric, taking into account multiple factors for the allocation of an AP position?
Position or positions,
Right.
right? So add that S position, right? Like parenthesis S.
And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I would like to add at the end of that recommendation something along the lines that says, and also consider merging low enrolled schools. Also consider, not that I'm saying consolidate or merge or whatever, but it needs to be put on the table. Because I think Ricardo updated his info that TAP and Project MAR are at 2 sites, correct, Ricardo? So there's one site that has 23 students, another site that has 55. And then, for example, Santa Rita, the smallest high school, has 341. So can we at least add and consider merging low enrolled schools? And consider, at least consider low enrolled schools, because I'm telling you, on the pavement, leaders are talking about that. And I know it's always the unpopular thing to talk about as a superintendent, but I'm telling you, in-house leadership is saying, why?
Jason, your hand's up.
Thank you. For me, I don't think it's our place. It doesn't mean that I disagree with you, Dr. Toto, but it says, school-based administrative positions. I don't see it as our place to, within our scope, to talk about, the schools with low enrollment. I do think that it is the place of this committee, not our committee, but the group that will be looking at AP positions. That should be something that has to be something that will be part of their process. It has to. Enrollment has to be part. It's not like we're saying that enrollment shouldn't be one of the pieces. And for that matter, it may be the most important piece, truly, right? But we also are saying but there has to be some other factors that are accounted for. And so not just enrollment. So for me, I personally I don't think that we need to put something that talks about low enrolled schools because I think it's understood, right? And I think once the conversation happens, there's certain schools that are going to roll into that conversation. They're just going to naturally, right? Booth Thicket's going to come into that conversation. Santa Rita is going to come into that conversation, despite the eloquent words of their principal. It's going to, right? And so I don't think it needs to be specifically laid out. I do think I like what I'm seeing much more so here. And again, if other people disagree, that's fine. But I do like what I'm seeing here, which says creating a comprehensive rubric review of the AP position or positions. I do, clearly we haven't finished that sentence. But I think that's probably I don't think we need to go further into depth in our recommendation. I do think Stacy has a responsibility as the chair in expressing this to the board. What that entails, right?
Dr. Siqueiros.
I just want to say that I agree with Jason's comments in that the comprehensive rubric review and I'm assuming that means creating a rubric as well of some sort that in itself will give more clarity as to what the priorities are based on input from committee members and other folks that have a say in this. And if we keep it to that, I think the work of this group that we're recommending will get to a more positive and more concrete approach at dealing with this dilemma at this particular point in time. If we make it too broad, then it becomes too challenging, and then we don't want this to get too politicized at any level, including with our administration and certainly not with our community, but because everyone's going to be advocating for their school community. And I just want to say this other thing too about school closures. I was there when there was the first big round of school closures in the the mid 2000s. And that by far was probably one of the most challenging periods of my educational career. How do you tell parents in the community and teachers that you're shutting down a school? And even though that might be part of this conversation at a certain point, I just think the more we find a way to make this recommendation doable and viable, it comes up to again this comprehensive rubric that steers the governing board in the direction that they can make informed decisions at this particular point in time.
Thank you. I will also second that as a person that came into Valencia years after Valencia they closed Hohokam and it had been absorbed into Valencia. The trauma that reverberated still through Valencia was gut-wrenching to the community until we kind of had to bring people together and build. And I came in many years after that happened. And I'm not saying that we in a budget advisory committee might not have to deal with it next year as things come up and as money gets tighter. But I also want to just kind of, like Jason said, set our priority as we're sticking to this with as it does get tighter. There are whole bunches of studies and community and all this other factors for that piece that I don't want people to not listen to our advice because they think we're trying to shut schools down. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the best advice for the money limitations that we have. Okay, with that said, I do want to go back to our little recommendation as we're working on that. I was wondering in the beginning, we said prioritizing site budgets and position that interact directly with students and creating blank, blank, blank. I was wondering if we wanted to say something like prioritizing site budgets over central administration, because that's what kind of ticked all this off yesterday, feels like yesterday. Last week was when we got to see really the breakdown from central administration of those positions. I just want to be specific because people may or may not be really, and some people do watch us, but may not watch us. And I don't want it to be misconstrued that what we're really talking about is our gut punch reaction when we saw the central administration listing and budget. So if we wanted to add that to say something like prioritizing site budgets over central administration or something like that. So I don't know, wordsmith that, but we wanted to incorporate that in our beginning.
Yes, and I agree with Taylor with how she mentally was trying to word craft it and separating them kind of. So under priority number 4 to have maybe 2 separate little paragraphs. So prioritizing site budgets, I wouldn't even say over central administration because I would say something along the lines, prioritizing site budgets and positions that interact directly with students, colon, and then underneath that have 2 bullets, right? Because we want to always make sure that the decisions that the budget committee is making it's putting students first and foremost in everything, right? So if we say prioritizing site budgets and positions that interact directly with students, colon, and then move the rest of that to a colon or to a bullet, maybe it would be a bullet and then would say by creating a comprehensive rubric review of the AP positions taking into account, or just, no, you don't even need that. By creating a comprehensive rubric review of the AP positions at each school site or at the school sites, and then leave it at that. And then the next bullet at the school sites, and then the next bullet would be something along the lines of how do we word craft this? Because I want to let you guys know I did some homework, right? About the second part. I did reach out and talk to people from district. I talked to other leaders at the district level, and I said, okay, here is our dilemma. Here's our situation. Where would you think would make sense for the district to cut? And I spoke to a variety of leaders, okay, at the district and other leadership. Okay, so I was trying to be very eclectic with my interviewing of people. And they all said students first. They all recommended look at ESSER funds and how ESSER funding positions moved over into district positions that are now paid by other budgets, and is that any longer sustainable? For example, and I've used this example before, but it's a perfect example. Back before COVID, the counseling department at Central Administration was run by 3 people, 2 coordinators and 1 administrative assistant. If you look at the budget that Ricardo sent us now, just for the counseling department Central, it's 16 people now instead of 3. It's 16. And okay, albeit of those 16, 5 are paid out of grants. But that's still 11. That is, ¿qué? 11 minus 3, ¿qué son? 8? 8. That's 8 people more that are getting paid just from the department that I work under alone. That's a lot. That's a lot, folks. And then, so I'm thinking ESSER. Maybe the first thing that the second part of this recommendation would consider, okay, what did ESSER cover? And then it got switched into our M&O and all these other budgets that TUSD has. Is that any longer sustainable? And how did this inflation of departments just grow? And if we're going to prioritize students first, one of the things that they said is, okay, look at adults that directly impact students at central level, right? Which adults? Because a lot, if you look at the different departments that were broken down, it's adult, and then adult to direct student interaction or with their teachers directly. Then that's where we have to reinstate again. Okay, what's our priority? Students first. Okay, then let's start working at. Of course, you need a leader for the departments, but then if you're going to consider of all those people, going back to what Taylor said, if we only talk with the directors of each of these departments, the concern is that they're going to want to cut maybe even the people that ¿cómo se llama? That work with students directly, and we don't want that, right? But here's the thing, and again, this is just the feedback that I got from people. They said, well, what about like the student mentors in the different departments who mentor and do professional development with other teachers at other sites? One person recommended, why can't we get those teachers that used to be teachers at the school sites go back to the classroom and be like the teacher, PLC teacher leaders at their school site. Instead of like, because we don't want people to lose their jobs, but maybe we can shift them back into the classroom, back into their schools. And then at the school sites, these different teachers that are teacher mentors right now could be the ones at their school site serving as PLC leaders, for example. But like interventionists, like again, I think I mentioned before, enrollment ambassador roles and responsibilities that could be observed by their front office staff that are at each school site. Again, like the pendulum, if you look at that, and just bring it all back right where it impacts the students the most, right? So that was kind of the feedback that I got too. And then I was looking at the student service departments like Mexican American, African American, Native American, Asian American, and their budget is really, it's not equal at all. And I assumed, right, that the Mexican American Studies Department was going to be the department that had the most money to spend in their department alone, because, you know, the percentage of Mexican American students in TUSD is the highest, if I'm not mistaken, but it still is the highest. And yet I looked at the grand total of how at central office, how much they spend on their central personnel, and Mexican American Studies is not the highest in of those four, is not the highest in its expense of its spending at the central level. So that was a surprise to me. So again, how can we readjust the organization, shift some of those central people back into their schools and the classrooms and be leaders on those campuses? And then really look again at the ESSER funding and how those jobs got absorbed by TUSD that we cannot afford. We cannot afford. Again, like I said, we are now from having 3 people in the counseling department central, we're now at 16. That's not sustainable. And I'm in that department, you know. So again, I don't know how we can word craft that to like a sentence in that bullet, but you know, I don't know. That I know I gave you guys a lot of food.
Thank you, Dr. Toro. And Ricky's hand is up, and I'm sorry it blended in with your circle in the background, so I didn't recognize it at first. Go for it.
So just a few items of clarification. First, the social emotional learning and counseling department has 16 FTEs. Half of those are not related to counseling. So five of those are community health workers. You've got a program coordinator in social emotional learning. I mean, if you want to kind of add them to counseling, I don't know, but my understanding is that's not what they do. And you've got a manager and a coordinator that do substance abuse prevention. That's part of the substance abuse prevention initiative that is being funded with the VAPE, the Juul settlement funding. So really what you've got is you've got 8 positions that are directly connected to counseling itself. Right. So you know, and like and I'm not gonna I have no idea whether that's too many or not enough, but I just want to make sure that I clarify that out of those 16 positions, they just all happen to live in the same department. Not all of them are doing counseling or school counselor related work. So I just kind of in defense of that department. One kind of self-serving comment that I would like to make though is that you know, a lot of these positions, I certainly understand trying to keep as many of the positions that work directly with kids available, but not all of us do that, but we still have a job we have to do. You're not going to have a payroll associate who is ever probably going to interact with a kid. But everybody on this screen, probably with the exception of Dr. Siqueiros, is an employee of the district. So we all need a paycheck. We've got 7 associates for 8,000 employees. My thing is that I just want to make sure that, you know, I completely agree. Being the father of two TUSD kids, I want as much as I can to get to them versus to get to adults. But not every position that is in here is necessarily going to touch a student. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value, right? And I'm saying that mostly in the defense of the 40 people that I supervise. We've added 3 people in the time that I've been in my job. And one of them is accounts payable. One of them is an admin person to the purchasing department, which didn't cost anything. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is I completely agree with the idea of trying to find positions that can be absorbed into other things. However, I just want to caution 2 things, right? So you talked about the teacher mentors or student mentors. I forget what the job was. If we move those into a school, the way to save money is you either move them into a vacant position, or you move them there, you eliminate the position and you move some of the duties to those people, but there's no added compensation, right? It's kind of a defeating approach if I say I'm going to eliminate a $50,000 position, but I'm going to give the person who's going to take over those duties at the school maybe $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever. I mean, is it possible? Sure, because ultimately 5,000 is less than 50,000. But the idea is, you know, we're trying not to kind of shuffle the chairs on the deck. We're just trying to get chairs off deck, right? And so I just kind of want to caution, you know, as you think through the process of trying to shuffle people back to schools, it really should be to replace vacancies, and it really shouldn't be just we're moving you from here to here. Or if we're going to move duties, it has to be in a cost-effective approach so that we're ultimately absorbing dollars. And then I've had the question, Dr. Toro, about why Mexican American Student Services gets less money than like African American Student Services. I could not even tell you what that answer is. That's just kind of been like a long train of a lot of decisions that have been made that got us to that point. Whether that's enough or not, that's totally a programmatic out of my bounds kind of question. So I just wanted to make those.
Okay, and I did want to jump in real quick, and then we'll go Dr. Toro and Jason real quick. So one thing I also wanted to say, and I thought that was a great thing, Ricky, thank you for advocating, because, and I know you probably talk to a lot of people, Dr. Toro, because I have also, at the same time as you talk to people, you start to find that in some departments, maybe they don't help me personally at Valencia, but when I am talking to a principal, they're like, oh no, they're my life support and we definitely need that department. And that's where it really comes into, I would like, if we really want to keep that in, is maybe doing some, like if we wanted to add that, like a comprehensive rubric for outside departments or something like that. I don't know what that is, and I'm just throwing that out there based on our conversation. But if we have to do cuts and we're doing cuts at the site and at teachers, there should be, in my opinion, cuts at central administration for that. I will add for this, but the right cuts, because Ricky is correct. There has been positions that have been needed to be added in HR or in finance that has made things become more effective and smoothly. And if we just say, hey, you're lowest on totem pole, we need to go down people, then we don't get paid or we can't process hiring. So I really want to be, and that backs up the whole system where people are mad at principals or people are mad at, I don't know, the superintendent. And it's really because we just don't have the correct people. So that's me finishing my statement, Dr. Toro, and then Jason.
So I was also looking, I hear you, Ricardo, about like, just shifting doesn't always, get us to the 2.3 mil that we need to cut, right? But like, for example, I looked at every single department and I found in community school and pre-K program, they have three, almost all of the departments have one administrative assistant. Then I get to community school and pre-K program, they have three administrative assistants. Then I went to curriculum development. They have three administrative assistants. And then I went to exceptional education. They have five administrative assistants. So again, I want to kind of go back to what Taylor said, where she's like, my concern is that if you only go to ask the directors of each department where they would recommend a cut in their department, that they would, of course, it's survival, right? It's self-preservation. You're not going to want to put your job in the hat to be cut. And so then that lends itself to the possibility that they're not going to put their job there, even though it should probably be. But that, that other positions that are critical, that are lifelines, like, you mentioned, Stacy, are the ones that they're going to choose to recommend to cut. So my suggestion would be for the second bullet to say, if the directors were to meet with that committee on a comprehensive rubric review, that in considering where the cut should be at their central department, that priority jobs to be preserved would be the ones that have the most direct contact with students, something like that, to go along with where it says prioritizing site budgets and positions that interact directly with students, right? So we're aligning, right, with both bullets to that number one stance that we have, that if the directors are going to be asked to consider cuts in their central office departments, that the positions that work most directly with students should be preserved ideally, something like that.
Stacy, did you want me to go now?
Yes, please. Sorry.
No, you're good. I just want to make sure. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I can get behind what Dr. Toro was talking about. I think everything past the bullets should just be immediately just deleted. There's no reason for them. If people disagree, that's okay. But I think what we're getting back to is the same place, which is it's not to say that, I don't know, it's not to say that anybody isn't important. I mean, if someone were to say, hey, Ricky, you got to lose somebody on your staff, there's not somebody who immediately is like, oh yeah, well, John, see you later, right? Like, I mean, and there's nobody on anybody's staff or anybody's department, right, that's like expendable, right? And we are forced to do kind of what Dr. Toro talks about, where it was, fend for ourselves, because the state hasn't funded public education well, right? So like, that's the enemy. It's not 1010, and it's not administrators, and it's not teachers or whoever. But the reality is what it is. Okay. But I'm still going to come back to, I'm not going to make that cut. Stacy, as our chair, is not going to make the cut. The governing board's going to make that cut. And it's our job to lead them in the directions that we think are in the best interest of our kids. And after our kids, our staff. And when we talk about staff, we do have to say, okay, That's the people who are directly in contact with our kids, with the understanding that I can't do this by myself as a classroom teacher. I need assistant principals, I need principals, and I also need people who are working at 1010 or at different facilities that I don't know who they are and I don't know what they do. But Taylor can't teach if those people aren't doing what they do, right? And so I think that where we're at, I mean, I think we should refine that piece that says directors to consider position cuts. I mean, but it gets back to what Stacy said, which is we're being very specific. It's not to say the 1010 staff aren't of value. It is to say we're stuck between, things that are needed and things that are needed more. And so with the things that are needed more, the ones that have a day-to-day contact with our kids, and can we make things work in other spaces? So that's what I would say is I appreciate that those other pieces were deleted. If somebody thinks I'm off base, that's fine. And I think we should finalize that last piece in a way that's more succinct. Stacy, maybe you have a thought on how to help us to get there.
Ricky, did you have your hand up? I think it's down.
Yeah, just the community schools, each one of those admin assistants is in a different location. So Brickta has one, Shoemaker has one, and then there's one for the after school programs. So in some instances, the line items don't tell the story because some of those people might be housed in different locations, right? We need an admin assistant at Shoemaker, to handle, the 120 pre-K kids we've got there. We need an admin assistant at Brickta to handle the 200 kids and families that we've got there, right? So in some of those, and that's where, like you said, a director would have to go through those. If I could make a suggestion about, could we change it, directors to consider recurring cuts to recurring expenses? Because if if ultimately we achieve a cut, without having to lose a person, I mean, at the end of the day, it's money in the bucket, right? And it's just not a recurring expense. So I'm wondering if the committee might be open to talking about recurring expenses, which can include positions, because obviously a position is a recurring expense, but we've got software licenses, for example, that potentially may be consolidated, that cost a lot of money, and we can get rid of those over a person, over a job. So.
Would you say though, sorry, Taylor, you're next. Would you say directors to consider position cuts? Is it recurring expenses? Can you just maybe explain that a little more? Because if I have to explain this later or other people, or we can talk later, that's a little more finance to me.
Yeah, so directors to consider cuts to recurring expenses. So
then in parentheses, IE, right, Ricardo? In parentheses, IE, software, positions, whatever.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Taylor.
Yeah, I'll say it anyway, even though I do honestly like that better, the idea of focusing on just these recurring expenses rather than focusing on positions, because I would much rather cut a software than a job. But I'll say it anyway, just because I already typed it out all nicely. So by reviewing central administrative positions to prioritize positions that interact directly with students and perform vital operations. But I am leaning more towards away from the wordage of positions and more towards just recurring expenses in general. Yeah, that's good up there. Perfect. Thank you.
Jason.
Yeah, I'm just throwing this out there so that it's heard by folks who sometimes get to be in rooms that make decisions. I agree, and yet if somebody were to decide, so no, it's not if somebody, a week ago IXL wasn't working and half of my staff were freaking out because that's what they use, right? So as we say, get rid of some programs. I mean, again, that's really easy to say, and yet some of those are programs that somebody thinks has no value and somebody else thinks has great value. So I think that needs to be part of that analysis that starts saying, what are we using?
Could we say something similar, like I don't know. I just think like a comprehensive review, even in our programs, is if you had like more of a standardized expectations, here's how we know that something is a return on investment, more than just an I like it or my staff is comfortable with it. So something like directors to consider position cuts, or directors to consider a comprehensive review of position cuts to recur, because that way you're looking at what really works. I don't know if you guys like that.
But I think what Ricardo was recommending, which I think is more broad and not as defensive, it would be directors to consider a comprehensive review of recurring expenses. So directors to consider a comprehensive review of recurring expenses, and then i.e. software, comma, positions, etc. Directors to consider a comprehensive review of recurring expenses, i.e. software, positions, etc. And then you guys can finish it off.
Taylor, your hand was up, I thought, but it's down again. What do you guys think of this so far?
Yeah, I think that's good. Toro said what I was going to say anyway.
Or we have to say cuts though somewhere though, right? Directors to consider a comprehensive review of recurring expenses and consider cuts. No, yeah, after the parentheses.
Potential.
And consider potential cuts to recommend to the board. And consider potential cuts to recommend to the board.
Do we want them to consider potential cuts or to determine potential cuts?
Governing board ultimately gets this information and then they make their final decision based on the feedback from, like, say, the directors or the leadership team that considers which schools should have or not have AP or how many AP positions and stuff. Again, it's like further recommendations to the board, right? Is that what happens?
Jason.
Thank you. No, I think Dr. Siqueiros is spot on. I was the one who said consider, and I'm wrong. You're right. Whatever the term you just said is exactly right, because determine potential cuts. So they're making the determination. Doesn't change that we don't get to. They're not a decision maker, but they're saying here we have determined these are potential cuts, right?
Yeah, the second consider.
I do like that too, because it makes them make a decision, in my opinion, versus, oops, we're good. So I wanted them to use the same thing we did. You can type, is it determine?
Yeah.
Type in and determine potential cuts.
I will move to make the recommendation as written.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor to move the recommendation, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Oh my goodness gracious. I feel like we just solved all the world's problems, and I know it's just the tip of the iceberg and we've actually done nothing. But we have some great recommendations. It is 5:24 and we do not have, based on the governing board, any Additional future goals or priorities. This is our last meeting. So I believe I'll be presenting on February 11th is what we said last time. Jason,
Can we be sent an invite, Tanya, like an Outlook invite, so that we don't forget to listen to our leaders speak to the governing board? And then will we be getting like a revised this revised form, Tanya, as well?
Yes, you will. But you had a motion and a second, Stacy.
Oh.
You need to vote.
Oh,
I thought we did vote.
we already did.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't hear you guys.
Oh, okay. Everyone said aye. There was no opposed.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, we're moving so fast now that we finally got some traction.
I'm just wondering, I haven't heard anything from Zinnia Vidal. I don't know if she's on or just want to make sure she voted. I know that she didn't comment, so I just wanted to check in on that.
Yes, I did vote.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
You're welcome.
Okay, there was still some hands. So Jason and then Taylor.
Do we have more business, Stacy, other than adjourning?
No, we didn't. We just had 5.2 as a request for information, but we didn't necessarily need any because Ricky got that back and we ended with a motion.
Perfect. So then this would be a good time to thank Stacy for your leadership. We date back actually to Ricky chairing this, and then myself and Taylor. And Stacy, you've done an excellent job, not just in running the meetings, but helping us to formulate the thoughts that we had. And I'm excited to see how you are going to represent us as you present to the governing board. So I do want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody for serving, but definitely thank you for Stacy, because I know what that burden is, and it's greatly appreciated. You have served us well.
Thank you, Stacy. And also, so today is our last meeting?
Yes, today should be our last meeting.
Okay. And so okay, so moving forward, when would be our first meeting for the next school year? So I don't know if we can plan ahead or we're not there yet. And then also if our leadership for our committee is still going to be the same.
Since it is a committee decided by the governing board, they typically, and Ricky, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing you nod, they typically give us a course of action and things to talk about. And they also have meetings about membership, and people can apply for the membership. It is always open so that it could apply. And as we head into, we're the same committee this year. So once we present, if we do head into and they request, the governing board requests us to do other tasks, we could have other meetings, which we would call the committee to again. But at this moment, it is done for the year. And I do anticipate it will be done because then budget and all the actions we gave them start happening on the other end. But like I said, that will come out of the governing board meeting.
Yeah.
Is that good, Ricky?
Yeah, so you guys, I believe most of you, we had you reappointed last go around because some of your terms have expired. Some of you are new, like Dr. Toto is new, and so your term hasn't expired. So you'll continue. Our goal is, one of the things that I heard last meeting is to try to make sure that we get you guys started sooner. So our goal is to try to get these budget priorities squared away by the board, in the late spring, early summer, so that you guys can kick off in August. Versus waiting until September and then things get back to back, especially if they're kind of heavy topics. So if you have suggestions for future topics, you can email us and we can pass those along to the board and let them know, these are some of the suggestions. But ultimately they'll come up with, anywhere between, usually this year it was 4, sometimes it's been 5. I think 4 is a good number. It felt like 4 was a nice kind of even number to to stick to, especially when the topics are pretty loaded. So, yeah, that's kind of how we'll do it.
Taylor.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't see our board liaison on here, who I think who probably should hear this, but maybe somebody can pass it along to her. Just that if the board could maybe come to those priorities maybe in summer, that way we can start meeting in September. Just because we keep running up against this deadline of when the budget is due, I'd like to really get our recommendations well in advance of that budget deadline for next year. Thank you.
And I'm going to say, just as a suggestion, even if we had maybe even shorter presentations, like I'm not saying, but like if we decided some of this and we prioritize them, maybe if we had mini presentations to the board, like halfway through, if we did one, I don't know. That was just something that maybe could get rolling before we had to go through all of them. Dr. Toro.
So refresh my memory. So for all of us who are, because Ricardo said I'm new and I am new. So is this position a 3 or 4 year thing? It's a 1 year, Jason?
You should have received a letter from Yolanda Borboa, an email from Yolanda Borboa with your information on your term length.
Oh, okay.
So
Got it.
just
Thank
go
you.
back and take a look at that. And I also just wanted to mention that we have received a couple of applications for Budget Advisory Committee members. However, they are not complete. They have not submitted a letter of interest, a resume. So we're in a code, what is it? A conflict of interest form. So if they aren't completed, we can't forward them onto the committee. So that's why there hasn't been an executive session. And that's normally what happens is when we do receive completed applications, we forward them onto the chair. And then from there, the committee decides to schedule an executive session to review those. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And this now feels like anticlimactic, but are you guys ready to leave and start your evening? Okay, so I am calling a motion to end the meeting at 5:32. Can I get a second?
I second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
You guys have a wonderful night. We've discussed horrible topics, I think, and we've done it in a great way. And I always feel supported, and you all help me flush out all the crazy that goes on in my head to make hard decisions. So thank you, and thank you all for being supportive and bringing your ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Adios,
Stacy.
everyone.
everybody.
Good work,
Everybody.
people.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you in February.